you were Rachel, would you step back or realize too late what he planned?
The second the heater clicked on, the room filled with that sharp, unmistakable gas smell, and my husband didn't move. He just stood behind me and said, "Stay there a second, make sure it's working." I'm Rachel, standing in my own bedroom doorway, watching something that already feels wrong, while Mark lingers just far enough back like he doesn't want to breathe it in. He told me to test it. Me. Not him. Not even a quick step inside, just me, standing there like it was nothing. So I didn't move. I stepped aside and called his brother over instead. Ethan walked in without even looking up from his phone. And that's when Mark suddenly went quiet and took a step back. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Right as the smell got stronger and Ethan said, "Wait, do you guys smell?" I looked at Mark so fast my neck hurt. Not at Ethan, at Mark. Because Ethan was already inside the bedroom, half a step past the foot of the bed, one hand still on his phone, and Mark wasn't reacting like a man who'd just realized something was wrong. He wasn't rushing forward, he wasn't saying, "Turn it off," he wasn't even pretending to laugh it off anymore. He was just watching. The heater gave off a low mechanical hum from the wall near our dresser, and the smell hit harder, thick and chemical and sour, the kind of smell your body understands before your brain catches up. Ethan lifted his head for the first time, finally paying attention, and frowned toward the vent. "Yeah," he said, squinting, "that's gas." I moved before I even knew I'd decided to. "Step out," I said. But Mark's voice cut across mine immediately. "No, just give it a second." It wasn't what he said, it was how fast he said it. Too fast, too sharp, like he'd been waiting to stop me. Ethan turned slightly, looking between us now, his phone lowering in his hand. "What do you mean, give it a second?" Mark forced out a short breath and tried on this irritated little smile I knew too well. "It's a new heater. Rachel is acting like the house is about to explode." I didn't laugh. Ethan didn't either. And that's when I felt it. That cold, crawling feeling that starts in your stomach and climbs into your throat. Because this wasn't just about the smell anymore. It was the way Mark had asked me to do it. The way he hadn't stepped in himself. The way he'd backed up the moment Ethan went in. The whole thing felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain yet, only sense. "Ethan, come out," I said again, firmer this time. He finally took a step back toward the doorway, and Mark's entire body changed for 1 second. It was tiny. Most people would have missed it, but I didn't. His shoulders tensed. His jaw tightened, like something wasn't going the way he expected. And that was the moment fear became something else. Not panic. Recognition. I wish I could tell you I understood everything right there in that hallway. I didn't. I didn't know exactly what Mark had done. I didn't know how far he'd gone or what he thought was supposed to happen next. But I knew with a certainty that made my hands go cold that my husband had wanted me in that room. Not him. Me. And when I didn't go, he hadn't argued because Ethan had walked in instead. That should have made no sense. But standing there in our bedroom doorway, with the stale winter air in the hall and that gas smell pushing out around us, it suddenly felt like the only thing that made sense. Ethan stepped out into the hallway, coughing once into his fist. "That's not normal," he muttered. "You need to shut that thing off." "Rachel," Mark said, warning in his voice now. I ignored him, reached past Ethan, and hit the switch. The hum cut off. The silence that followed felt loud. For a second, nobody moved. The three of us were just standing there, me in the doorway, Ethan beside me, and Mark several feet back near the wall, farther away than he needed to be. His face had gone tight in that controlled way he got when he was angry and trying not to show it. That should tell you something about how things had been in our house lately. I noticed the anger before I noticed the fear. Because fear would have made sense. Anger didn't. A month earlier, I probably would have brushed it off. Told myself he was stressed. Told myself he hated being questioned. Told myself I was overreacting, like he always said I was when I caught him in a contradiction. But the truth is, by then, too many little things had already started stacking up in my mind. Separately, each one looked small. Together, they felt like pressure building behind a locked door. Mark had been different for weeks. Not in some dramatic, obvious way. He still went to work, still asked what was for dinner, still left his coffee cup in the sink and complained about bills and acted annoyed when Ethan stayed in the shower too long. From the outside, it probably looked normal. Inside the house, it didn't. He was short with me in ways he'd never been before, distracted, defensive. His phone was suddenly always face down. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd lock the screen without even thinking about it. He'd started waking up in the middle of the night and disappearing downstairs for 20 minutes at a time, and when I asked what he was doing, he'd say he couldn't sleep. We'd been arguing more too, mostly about money. Mark had put money into some business thing with a friend from high school 6 months earlier. He'd called it an opportunity, then he'd called it temporary, then he stopped calling it anything at all. By the time winter hit, the savings account was thinner than he admitted. The credit card bill had become a source of constant tension, and every conversation about spending turned into him acting like I was accusing him of something. Then Ethan moved in. That part mattered more than I realized at the time. Mark's younger brother had lost his apartment after getting laid off, and Mark insisted we let him stay in our spare room for a few weeks. Ethan was easy enough to live with, mostly because he barely seemed present. He kept odd hours, scrolled on his phone constantly, and had this detached way of moving through the house, like he didn't want to disturb anything. We weren't close, but we weren't tense either. If anything, he was the opposite of Mark Quiet, where Mark was forceful, passive, where Mark always needed to control the room. I hadn't wanted a third person in the house when things between me and Mark were already strained, but Mark pushed it through so hard I dropped it. That was another pattern. Lately, everything had become his decision. The heater was his decision too. We already had central heat, but the back bedroom always ran colder in winter. It was annoying, not dangerous. The kind of problem most people solve with a thicker blanket or a space heater. But Mark came home one evening talking about a deal he got from a guy he knew, some wall-mounted gas unit that would heat the room properly. He said paying someone to install it would be a waste. He could do it himself. I remember standing in the bedroom with my arms folded while he unpacked it from the box on the floor. "You've never installed one before," I said. "It's not complicated." "That doesn't mean you should do it." He looked up at me like I'd insulted him. "You think I can't handle a basic install?" I think gas isn't something you guess your way through. That should have turned into a normal argument. The kind couples have every day and forget by morning. But it didn't. He got weirdly defensive more than the situation called for. He started talking over me, telling me I always assumed he'd fail before he started, telling me I treated him like he was incompetent in his own house. His own house. That phrase stayed with me. Not our house. His. In the end, he installed it anyway. Over the next 2 days, I noticed things that bothered me even then. He wouldn't let me near it while he worked. When I asked if he'd checked for leaks, he snapped that he knew what he was doing. At one point, I came into the room and found him just staring at the unit, not working on it, just staring. And when he saw me, he flinched like I'd caught him doing something private. Then that morning, he told me he was ready to test it. Not we, me. I was in the kitchen rinsing a mug when he came in and said, way too casually, "Come upstairs and make sure that heater works." I remember laughing a little because I thought he meant, "Come look at it with him." Then he said, "I need you to stand in there for a minute after I turn it on." I actually turned and stared at him. Why would I do that? To see if it's heating evenly. That made no sense. None. But he said it with such flat confidence that for 1 second, I almost let myself believe maybe I was the one being difficult again. That's what months of being dismissed does to you. It makes you hesitate in the middle of your own instincts. So I went upstairs. And the second that gas smell hit me, all of those little moments, his tone, his distance, the pressure, the way he refused to step in himself, came rushing back at once. Now, in the hallway, Ethan rubbed the back of his neck and looked at Mark. "Why did you tell her to stand in there?" Mark's eyes flicked to him. "I didn't." "You literally just did," I said. He looked at me then, and there was something in his face that made my skin prickle. Not guilt, not yet, something flatter, colder, like he was recalculating. Then he said, very quietly, "You're making this into something it isn't." And I would have argued back, I would have, right then, but Ethan took another breath, coughed harder this time, and said, "No, seriously, I feel kind of..." He grabbed the door frame, and Mark didn't move. Mark didn't move. That was the part that kept replaying in my head, even as I grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him fully into the hallway. "Sit down," I told him, guiding him toward the wall. "Just sit for a second." "I'm fine," Ethan said, but his voice wasn't steady anymore. He leaned back anyway, blinking like he was trying to clear his head. "That smell is... yeah, that's not... right." "No, it's not," I said, sharper than I meant to. Behind us, Mark finally stepped forward, but only after Ethan was already out of the room. I told you it just needed a second, he said, like he was trying to reset the moment, rewrite it into something smaller, manageable. I turned to him slowly. You told me to stand in there. And you didn't, did you? He shot back immediately. So what's the problem? The problem. I stared at him, trying to understand how he could say that so casually while his brother was still catching his breath next to me. Ethan let out a short, confused laugh. Yeah, no, I'm with Rachel on this one. Why didn't you just check it yourself? Mark's jaw tightened. Because I was adjusting the valve out here. That's how it works. That's not how anything works, I said. He exhaled hard through his nose, like he was already exhausted by me. You don't know what you're talking about. There it was again. That tone, dismissive, final, like the conversation was over, because he said it was. Except it wasn't over. Not this time. Then explain it, I said. Because from where I'm standing, you turned on a gas heater, told me to stand in a room that smelled like a leak, and didn't step in once yourself. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Not anger. Annoyance mixed with something tighter. Then it was gone. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said. It's a new install. There's always a smell at first. Not like that, Ethan muttered, still leaning against the wall. I've had space heaters before. That wasn't normal. Mark didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed on me. That's because you don't understand what you're smelling, he said. It's not gas. I almost laughed, but nothing about this felt funny. Then what is it? I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because Mark never hesitated when he was right. He doubled down. He argued. He talked over you until you gave up. That was his pattern. This was different. It's residue, he said finally, from manufacturing. Residue doesn't make someone dizzy, I said, nodding toward Ethan. I'm not dizzy, Ethan said automatically, then paused. Okay, maybe a little. Silence stretched between us. I could feel it building again, that pressure, like something was sitting just under the surface, waiting for one more push. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. Mark wasn't just standing back. He was standing near the hallway corner, closer to the stairs, further away from the bedroom than either of us. Like he'd chosen that spot. Like he'd thought about distance. My stomach tightened. Why were you back there? I asked quietly. His eyes snapped to mine. What? When Ethan walked in, I said, You stepped back. Why? I didn't. You did. Rachel. You did, I repeated, louder now. You moved away from the room. Ethan glanced between us, the confusion on his face starting to shift into something sharper. Yeah, actually, you did. Mark let out a short, disbelieving laugh, but there was no humor in it. So now we're doing this? Tag teaming me over nothing? Nothing, I said. You won't even go in there. That's not true. Then go, I said immediately, stepping aside and gesturing toward the bedroom. Right now, turn it back on and stand there. The words hung in the air. Simple, direct. And for the first time since this started, Mark didn't have an immediate response. He just looked at me. Then at the bedroom, then back at me. Seconds passed. Too many seconds. Ethan straightened slightly against the wall, watching him now with a completely different expression. Yeah, he said slowly. Go ahead. Mark's jaw flexed. I don't need to prove anything to you. Then why did I shot back. That landed. I saw it. A crack small, but real. Because there was no good answer to that. No casual explanation for why I had been the one standing in that doorway instead of him. The air in the hallway felt heavier now, even without the gas. Turn it back on, I said again, quieter this time. Mark didn't move. Didn't speak. And that silence said more than anything he could have. Ethan pushed himself off the wall slowly, his eyes still on his brother. Okay, hold on, he said. Why does it feel like neither of you is saying what you're actually thinking? I didn't take my eyes off Mark. Because I think he already knew what would happen, I said. Mark's head snapped toward me. That's insane. Is it? I asked. Ethan frowned. Knew what would happen? How? I swallowed, the thought forming fully for the first time as I said it out loud. I think, I said carefully, he knew that heater wasn't safe. Silence. Thick, immediate. Ethan looked at Mark again, really looked this time. And Mark didn't deny it right away. That was the problem. That pause, that hesitation, that tiny window where the truth almost showed itself. Ethan's voice dropped. Wait, what? And before Mark could answer, the heater inside the bedroom clicked. On by itself, and the smell started seeping out again. The heater shouldn't have turned on. All three of us froze. I turned that off, I said immediately, my voice coming out tighter than I expected. Ethan looked toward the bedroom, then back at me. Yeah, you did. The low hum started again, soft at first, then steady, and just like before, the smell followed, faint, then sharper. Mark swore under his breath, but he still didn't move toward the room. Go shut it off, I said. You do it, he shot back instantly. That was it. That was the moment something in me locked into place. No, I said, I'm not stepping in there again. Ethan pushed off the wall, slower this time, more aware. Okay, hold on. Why is it even turning on by itself? It's probably a wiring issue, Mark said quickly. Too quickly. I told you, I just installed it. You installed it wrong, I cut in. His head snapped toward me. You don't know that. I know enough, I said. I know you won't go near it. Ethan let out a short breath, running a hand through his hair. Guys, this isn't normal, just open a window or something. I already did, I said. It's still running. The smell was getting stronger again, creeping into the hallway, wrapping around us like something thick and invisible. Ethan coughed lightly, and Mark again took another step back. Not toward us. Away from the bedroom. Away from the smell. Away from the risk. My chest tightened. Why are you backing up? I asked, my voice dropping. I'm not, he said, but he didn't step forward to prove it. Ethan noticed it this time. I saw it in his face the exact second it clicked. Dude, he said slowly, why aren't you going in there? Mark's irritation snapped back into place, sharper now, because I don't need to. It just needs to run through whatever's in the line. That's not how gas works, Ethan said, frowning. You don't run it through. If it smells like that, you shut it off. I said it's fine. You said that before I almost passed out, Ethan shot back. That word hung in the air. Almost, I felt my stomach twist. Because it hadn't just been discomfort. Ethan had grabbed the doorframe. He'd gone pale. That wasn't nothing. And Mark had watched it happen. Watched it and said, give it a second. I looked at him again, really looked this time. Not at what he was saying. At what he was doing. His breathing controlled, shallow. His distance from the doorway deliberate. His eyes not on the heater, but on us. Like he was measuring something, waiting. And then it hit me. Not fully, not all at once, but enough. A memory pushed forward something small, something I hadn't thought about since it happened. 3 weeks ago, late at night. Mark sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him. I'd walked in, half asleep, and asked what he was doing. Just organizing some stuff, he'd said, flipping one page face down a little too quickly. I'd caught a glimpse of my name. Didn't think much of it at the time. Until the next day when he casually mentioned, hey, I updated your life insurance policy, better coverage, just in case. Just in case. I hadn't questioned it. It sounded responsible, normal. But standing here now, with that smell creeping closer and my husband refusing to step into the same room he wanted me to stand in, it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt connected. My pulse started to pound. Rachel, Ethan said, pulling me back, what are you thinking right now? I didn't answer him. I was still staring at Mark. You took out a policy, I said slowly. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, tightened. What? Ethan asked. You took out a life insurance policy, I repeated louder now, in my name. Mark let out a sharp breath. That has nothing to do with this. Then why does it feel like it does? It doesn't, he said, too fast. You're reaching. Am I? I stepped closer to him. Because right now, it looks like you set up a gas heater, told me to stand in a room that smelled like a leak, and made sure you were nowhere near it. That's not what happened. Then explain it. I already did. No, you avoided it. The heater hummed louder. The smell hit harder. Ethan coughed again, this time deeper, his hand coming up to his mouth. Okay, no, seriously, he said, voice strained. This is getting bad. I didn't think anymore. I moved. I yanked my arm free as Mark reached for me too late this time and rushed into the bedroom. The air hit me like a wall, stronger than before, burning the back of my throat. I didn't hesitate. I lunged straight for the unit, fingers shaking as I slammed the switch down. The hum cut off instantly. Silence. I turned back toward the doorway, grabbing Ethan's sleeve and pulling him with me as I stumbled back into the hallway. Out, I said. Both of us. Now. We moved fast away from the bedroom, toward the stairs, toward cleaner air. Behind us, Mark didn't follow right away. And that, more than anything, made my chest go cold. Because as I looked back at him, still standing near that hallway corner, keeping his distance, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. He wasn't just avoiding the gas. He was avoiding being anywhere near where it was supposed to happen. Ethan steadied himself against the wall, breathing hard now, his face pale. What the hell is going on? He asked. I didn't take my eyes off Mark. I think, I said quietly, he wanted me in there. Ethan blinked at me. What? I swallowed. And when I didn't go, I continued, my voice tightening, you did. Ethan turned slowly toward his brother. And for the first time, there was no confusion left in his face. Only something sharper. Mark? He said. Mark didn't answer. He just stood there, silent, watching us, as the realization settled in the space between all three of us. And Ethan asked, very quietly, was she supposed to be in there instead of me? Answer him. My voice came out lower than I expected, but it cut through the hallway cleanly. Mark didn't respond. He just stood there, shoulders tight, eyes flicking between me and Ethan like he was trying to calculate which version of this situation he could still control. Ethan pushed himself fully upright now, one hand still braced against the wall, but his focus locked entirely on his brother. Mark, he said again, slower this time, was she supposed to be in there? Silence. Not confusion, not hesitation like before. This was different. This was a choice. Mark looked at him and then away. That was enough. Ethan let out a short, disbelieving breath, shaking his head slightly like he was trying to physically reject what was forming in his mind. No, that's not. He stopped himself, eyes narrowing. You told her to test it. It was just to check the heat, Mark said quickly, finally speaking again. That's all it was. Then why didn't you do it? I asked immediately. I already told you. No, I cut in. You didn't. You gave excuses. That's not the same thing, Ethan added, his voice tightening. Mark's jaw flexed. You're both twisting this. Then straighten it out, I said, right now. Another pause. Another opening where the truth could have come out clean. He didn't take it. Instead, he exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair, pacing once just a step, but enough to show the pressure was getting to him. You're acting like I tried to hurt someone, he said. The words landed wrong. No, I didn't. Just, you're acting like I did. Ethan caught it too. I saw it in the way his expression hardened. Didn't you? He asked. Mark stopped moving. And for the first time since this started, there was no irritation left in his face. No dismissal. Just something tight, cornered. I stepped forward slightly, closing the distance he'd been so careful to maintain. Look at me, I said. He didn't. Look at me, Mark. Slowly, he did. And up close, it was clearer his breathing wasn't just controlled. It was shallow, measured, like he'd been doing it on purpose this entire time. Avoiding the air. Avoiding the room. Avoiding the risk. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question anymore. His eyes flickered. That was it. That was the confirmation. Ethan let out a quiet, stunned laugh that didn't sound anything like humor. He dragged a hand down his face, then looked back at Mark with something raw and unfamiliar. You actually knew, he said. I didn't know it would be that bad, Mark snapped suddenly, the words coming out faster now, like something had finally cracked. I thought it would just leak a little, enough to... He stopped. Too late. The hallway went completely still. My ears rang. Enough to what? I didn't say it. I didn't need to. Ethan stared at him, eyes wide now, the pieces locking together in real time. Enough to what? He repeated, his voice dropping. Mark didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because now we both saw it. Not just suspicion. Not just fear. Intent. You told her to stand in there, Ethan said slowly. You stood out here and waited. Mark shook his head immediately. No, that's not. You waited, Ethan repeated, louder this time. For what? For her to what pass out? Collapse? And then what, Mark? Stop, Mark snapped. But Ethan didn't. And when she didn't go in, he continued pointing toward me. I did, and you didn't say anything. That part hung there. Heavy. Because it was true. Mark's silence then had been a decision. Just like this silence now. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not even fear anymore. Clarity. Cold, steady clarity. You didn't stop him, I said. Mark looked at me again, and there it was, the thing I'd been circling around this entire time. Not regret. Not shock. Calculation. I didn't think he started. No, I said, cutting him off. You did. Silence. Ethan took a step back from him, like the space between them suddenly mattered more than anything. You were going to let her stand in there, he said. And if something happened, you'd just, what? Call it an accident? Mark didn't answer. Didn't deny it. Didn't even try. And that was the moment everything shifted permanently. Ethan's voice dropped, quieter now but sharper than before. You were supposed to protect her. Mark flinched. Small, but real. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it meant he understood exactly what he'd done. I took another step back, putting space between us, not just physically, but in a way that felt final. Don't come near me, I said. Mark's head lifted slightly. Rachel, don't. Something in my tone must have landed, because he stopped. Actually stopped. For the first time, downstairs, a car passed outside. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Normal sounds, ordinary. None of it felt real anymore. Ethan looked between us, then toward the bedroom, then back at Mark. This isn't just messed up, he said quietly. This is... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Because we all knew what word came next. And standing there in that hallway, with the faint smell of gas still lingering in the air and the heater sitting silent behind us, there was only one question left that mattered. What exactly had Mark planned to happen if I had taken that step inside? What exactly had you planned? This time, I didn't soften it. I didn't leave space for him to twist around it or shrink it into something smaller. Mark looked at me like he was deciding whether there was still a version of this he could walk away from. There wasn't. You're making it sound worse than it is, he said finally, his voice lower now, controlled but thinner than before. Ethan let out a sharp, disbelieving breath. Worse than it is? He repeated. You rigged a gas heater and told your wife to stand in the room. I didn't rig anything, Mark snapped. I just didn't tighten one of the connections all the way. That's not the same thing. The words landed flat. Precise. Careful. And that was what made them worse. Not an accident, not a mistake. A choice. I felt something inside me settle completely. You left a gas line loose, I said, keeping my voice steady, on purpose. Mark didn't answer. That was the answer. Ethan stared at him, his expression shifting from anger into something colder. Why? That question hung there longer than anything else had. Why? Mark looked away first. For money, he said. No hesitation this time. No denial. Just the truth plain, stripped down, and ugly in its simplicity. My throat went dry, but I forced myself to keep looking at him. Be specific. He exhaled slowly, like he'd already accepted where this was going. I'm in debt, he said. More than you think. I already knew that. Not like this, he said, glancing back at me. The investment, it didn't just fail. I owe people a lot. Ethan frowned. Then get a loan, sell something. You don't... It wouldn't cover it, Mark cut in. Not fast enough. Silence. I already knew what he was going to say next. I just needed to hear him say it. The policy, I said. Mark's jaw tightened slightly. Yes. Ethan's head snapped toward me. What policy? My life insurance, I said, not taking my eyes off Mark. He updated it a few weeks ago. Ethan turned back to him slowly. You're serious? Mark didn't look at him. He increased the coverage, I continued. Didn't tell me how much, just said it was responsible. It was. Mark said quickly. It makes sense to have coverage. Not when you're planning to use it, I said. That shut him up. For a second, the only sound in the hallway was Ethan's breathing, still uneven, still recovering. You were going to let her die, Ethan said quietly. Mark shook his head immediately. I didn't know it would go that far. You said that already, I replied. You thought it would leak a little. Enough to what, Mark? He didn't answer. Because now there was nowhere left to hide inside the wording. Ethan stepped closer to him, not aggressively, but with purpose. Enough to make her pass out? He asked. Enough to make it look like an accident? Mark's silence stretched. Then, finally. Yes. The word barely made a sound. But it was enough. Everything after that moved quickly. Ethan pulled his phone out without another word. Mark noticed immediately. What are you doing? I'm calling this in, Ethan said. No, you're not, Mark snapped, stepping forward for the first time, but Ethan didn't back up. Yes, I am. Ethan, think about this. I am thinking about it, he cut in. You almost had me standing in there instead of her. That stopped Mark cold, because that part hadn't been part of his plan. I watched it, hit him the realization that the only reason this didn't end the way he intended was because of something he hadn't controlled. Me stepping aside, Ethan walking in. Chance. Put the phone down, Mark said, quieter now, not angry, desperate. Ethan didn't even hesitate. He turned slightly away and started the call. Yeah, he said, voice steadying as he spoke. We've got a gas leak and I think it was done on purpose. Mark looked at me then. Not at Ethan. At me. Like I was the one who could still fix this for him. Rachel, he said, softer now. We can figure this out. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. That shift? That attempt to pull me back into his version of things? We already did, I said. And then I stepped further away from him. Physically. Clearly. Final. The next hour unfolded in fragments. Sirens. Voices. Cold air rushing through the house as doors and windows were opened. 2 emergency responders moved straight to the bedroom, shutting off the gas line completely and inspecting the heater. One of them came back out, his expression tight. Who installed that unit? He asked. Mark didn't answer. Ethan pointed. He did. That was all it took. They didn't arrest him on the spot, but they didn't leave either. Police arrived not long after. Questions were asked, statements were taken. I told them everything. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just exactly what happened. What he said, what he did, what he didn't do. Ethan backed it up every part. The officer's expression didn't change much while we spoke, but I saw the shift when he looked at Mark. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't negligence. It was intent. By the end of the night, Mark was in the back of a police car. He didn't look at me when they put him in. I didn't try to make him. The fallout didn't stop there. It spread. Quietly at first, then all at once. Family found out. Not through us, but through the kind of calls that start with, something happened. Ethan cut contact completely. I didn't have to ask him to. Whatever bond they had as brothers didn't survive that hallway. Legally, it moved fast. Between the tampered heater, the gas line left intentionally loose, the insurance policy, and 2 consistent witness statements, there wasn't much room for interpretation. Attempted murder. Insurance fraud. Premeditation. Words I never thought would be attached to someone I married. The divorce process was immediate. Clean, in the sense that there was nothing left to argue over. Messy, in every other way. Weeks later, I was in a different place. Smaller, quieter, safer, no unfinished installations, no arguments echoing through the walls, no second-guessing every tone, every look, every silence, just space. I stood by the window one morning, letting fresh air move through the room, and for a second I thought about that moment again. The doorway, the smell, his voice telling me to step inside, and the split-second decision that changed everything. I didn't outthink him. I didn't uncover some elaborate plan in advance. I just paused and let someone else walk in first. That was it. That was the difference between being the one they carried out of that room and standing here now, Alive, clear, done. I rested my hand on the windowsill, feeling the cool air against my skin. He told me to test the heater, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. And after a beat, I added, I tested something else instead, and that's what saved me.
He told her to test a gas leak, but he stepped back. Accident, or was that planned?